So, if I was to start playing again, what might I do differently? What do I wish I'd learned when I was starting out? When I started playing, I was pretty much self-taught. I had a couple of lessons with a guitarist who showed me some scales. But apart from that, I was all on my own, just working it all out for myself. The way I learned might be a familiar story for a lot of you. I basically played along to albums, either working stuff out by ear or reading tablature that I found in magazines. This was pre-internet. I watched my heroes on VHS videotapes, read guitar and bass magazine columns and interviews for a deeper insight, but 99% of my development over the first couple of years came from just learning tunes on records and tapes. I played in a garage band with friends from school, but that was it for live experience. I bet that's pretty much how most of you started playing, or you might have just started and that's what you're doing. And let me first say that learning songs like that is probably the best practice that you can do. But over the next 30 years of playing through gigging, music college, teaching and just plain musical experience, there's a bunch of things that I think I could have learned earlier, making for quicker development and a lot less wasted time. So here are 10 things that I wish I'd learned when I started, and stay tuned for number 10, which might be a surprise to you. It has nothing to do with bass technique or practice or anything like that, but it does have everything to do with developing as a player, so stay tuned for that. So, number 1, I should have learned to read music sooner. I didn't start reading until music college, and it totally improved everything about my playing. When you learn to read, you learn the notes of the fretboard to an instinctive level, you learn everything about rhythm, you learn about theory, and you learn how to communicate more effectively as a musician. I wish I'd started reading right from the start, but back then in the late 80s and early 90s, there was no internet to help out and there were no progressive bass guitar reading methods. Of course now, the simple steps to sight reading course is available because I saw a gap in the market for an exhaustive reading method. So if you do want to learn to read, check out the course via the link in the description below and use the coupon code READINGNOW for a 30% discount. Number 2 is knowing the importance of the instrument that you play. Don't try and sculpt timbre. My first bass was a Westone Thunderjet, and I would listen to all these bass players like Billy Sheehan, Flea, Billy Gould, Paul McCartney, and I'd hear those tones wondering how they would create them. I'd wonder what pedals they used and what EQ settings they had. Now, obviously, there are a lot of variables when it comes to tone, especially in a studio recording. But one of the things that I really didn't get at the start was how that Westone was never going to sound like a Fender Jazz. It was never going to sound like a Stingray. It had its own sound. I used to try messing with graphic EQs and other tone controls to try and change the core timbre of my bass. Reality check, it ain't gonna happen. If you don't like the natural sound of your bass plugged into a pretty decent amp with no EQ at all, if you're constantly striving to change that natural sound, then you might need a different instrument. For number 3, staying in the tone zone, I wish I'd realised the importance of mid-tone controls. The bulk of your tone is dominated with the mid frequencies. If you're struggling to cut through in a mix on stage, if you can't hear yourself, don't just turn up the volume. Check your EQ. If you have a habit of cutting the mids whilst boosting the highs, you know, that good old smiley face EQ, then you're going to potentially cause problems. The lack of mids can cause you to disappear from the mix and distort as you boost the volume trying to compensate. So, word to the wise, if you want to cut through that mix, slightly boost the mids in the 200 Hz kind of region. Yes, it can sound a little bit honky when played solo, but we're not talking about solo playing. This is live playing in a band. For number 4, play lightly. Not all the time, just as a default. When I started out, I hardly ever practiced through an amp. That's fine, but one downside is that you can overplay. I was into metal and hard rock, and I spent all my time playing hard. That can lead to all kinds of physical problems like injured hands and reduced stamina. And here's the kicker. The tone doesn't really change beyond a certain impact. If you want that sharp attack, you know, that... you only need to push a little bit harder. But beyond the physical, it can also mess up your tone and musicality. Playing lightly will improve your sustain. You'll be ironing out those initial transients. It also helps with playing dynamically. If you're playing flat out all the time, you've nowhere to go. When you play lighter as a default, you can add accents into your playing and create more dynamics. Playing hard is fine if you want a certain tone, but it doesn't work for everything. And like I said, if you want a nice deep held note, play it lightly. For number 5, learn the basics of harmony. When I started, I learned from tab or by ear and just learned fretboard patterns with no real knowledge of what those patterns were. They were just shapes. So for a major scale, it's just a pattern. But over time, by studying harmony, by learning intervals, chord construction, arpeggios, scales, how chords work in keys, all that very basic stuff, you'll totally change how you see music on the fretboard, and learning music becomes a lot easier. For example, if you know that a bass line is using a root fifth pattern through a 1-4-5 progression, that's it. You've learned the bass line. Familiarity is key in all of this. The theory side of it is just labeling. You're learning the labels for all the things that you play. The labels allow you to store that information in your brain in a more ordered manner. Then, aside from memorizing tunes, you also learn how music works, so you become an all-round better musician. If you learn this stuff from the start, you're going to learn more stuff quicker. For number 6, related to the harmony tip, learn arpeggios ahead of scales. Yes, the major scale and the natural minor scale are important parts of learning, but trust me, chord tones, which you learn as arpeggios, are way more applicable in your playing. When you play a bass line through a chord progression, you can play root notes like this. But if you want to play more interesting lines like this, that comes from chord tones, not scales. The chord tones allow us to outline the progression, and then as you learn how to add notes around that framework, you'll start to realize how players like James Jamerson could weave beautiful melodic bass lines on those classic albums. Chord tones are the key to everything. Again, if you want to learn about the chord tones for every chord that you're ever going to see, how to map them over the entire fretboard and then apply them in your bass lines, check out the Chord Tone Essentials course over at TalkingBass. There's a link in the description, and again, use the coupon code CHORDTONETIPS for a 30% discount. Number 7 is all about speed. Speed should come easily, not from pushing. I was a total Billy Sheehan fanboy when I started, and I spent every waking moment trying to play all his crazy speed picking and tap lines. So I wanted to play fast and would take a line like this, and I'd play it to a metronome, building speed up and up and up. I was treating my playing like weightlifting, aiming for higher speed all the time. But then I realized that all this pushing as I was building speed would be working against me. When you push, you tense up, and for speed, you need relaxation. Relaxed playing will allow for higher speed and stamina. Your hands develop slowly over time. Pushing too much will just be self-defeating. Instead, aim for lighter, more relaxed playing with good technique and perfect execution at a slow tempo. Speed comes from familiarity of both the notes and the body mechanics. It might sound odd, but learning slow is the path to playing fast. Number 8 is pretty obvious, and that is that some of the more flamboyant techniques like tapping and slapping sound great, but are never used in probably 99% of songs. In all the working bands that I've played in, I've probably used slap technique on maybe 5 songs, maybe less than that. I practiced slapping and tapping a lot when I started out. I loved Billy Sheehan and Stu Hamm and spent a lot of time learning their solo lines. It can be pretty impressive playing that stuff for your friends, but if you want to play music for a living, there are way more important things to master. For example, after about 3 years of playing, I could play Billy Sheehan's solo piece NV 43345. But I couldn't play a walking bass line to save my life. Tapping's fun, but prioritizing it above more useful areas of your playing can be a mistake. Number 9 is build your repertoire. I spent a lot of time at the start learning songs, but I didn't learn standards. I learned Metallica's Master of Puppets album, a bunch of David Lee Roth and Mr. Big tunes, because, I liked Billy Sheehan. I learned a bunch of tunes that I liked, and that would, push my technique, which is great, and those songs improved my playing a lot. But I had neglected my overall repertoire. Learning a lot of standards in a variety of styles can be helpful in many ways. For one thing, you get to develop your playing stylistically so you can effectively play in different styles. If all you play is death metal and think you can just easily sit in on a disco band gig, forget it. It doesn't work like that. All styles have their idiosyncrasies and they need to be practiced. It doesn't matter how good your technique is, whether you can shred, playing sweep arpeggios and tap all over the place. If you've never played, let's say, a disco bass line, you're going to come up short. But beyond that, having a good repertoire will be incredibly important if you want to play music for a living. The more songs that you know, the more easily you can take gigs in a variety of different styles. For example, if you have a good knowledge of the most popular soul songs, you'll be able to get a gig with a soul covers band at short notice. If you have a good repertoire of jazz standards, you'll be able to sit in on jazz gigs. Knowing the standards from each style, be it pop, rock, funk, jazz, soul or country, will allow you to take gigs at short notice, which can be very useful when you're earning a living from playing. This became so apparent to me when I eventually turned professional and had to take any gig that I could just to pay the bills. Every pianist that I worked with would have a great repertoire of songs, and I became so much more envious of that skill than I was of fretboard gymnastics. The ability to just play any request at the drop of a hat is so impressive. The key to developing repertoire is just slow learning of standards. Make a list of the most popular soul songs, disco songs, classic rock songs, jazz standards, Elvis tunes, Beatles tunes, anything you can think of that might be the basis for a cover band. List out the top 30 songs in that style or from that artist and play along to them like you would a set list for a band. Over time, you'll learn a foundational set of riffs and chord progressions, and the more you learn, the easier it is to learn others. Then you can slowly build on each style over time. Plus, those playlists are great when you're finding it hard to practice. Just play along and have fun. And finally, number 10, the importance of bandsmanship. Now, what the hell is bandsmanship, you might be thinking? Well, this is actually a term I heard mentioned by a brilliant pianist that I played with some years ago. And I think it's just something that he used to say. It's not like an official term or anything, but it's such a great word for describing a certain side of playing. So musicianship is all the stuff that you practice to be a good musician. Your instrumental skills and your technique, ear training, composition, arranging, all that stuff. But bandsmanship is everything related to playing live on stage with a group of people. And this side of music is equally, if not more important than your ability to play if you're looking to have a career in music. So this could be something totally non-musical like rehearsal etiquette or how to deal with problems on stage like when the gear stops working. Or it can be a little more play related like how to communicate on stage, maybe with hand signals, what to play when sound checking your bass, or where best to set up your amp. There are thousands of things that come into play while playing in a band, and with experience from the booking of gigs to the journey to the venue, to the getting, to the playing, to leaving, you develop skills in bandsmanship just as you would musicianship. This is something I might have realised early in my playing, but I didn't realise how much it plays a part in being a musician. And here's the thing, you can only develop this through experience, by gigging, by working and playing with other musicians. Every bass player should aim to get in a band and play with other musicians as soon as possible. There's no right time to start gigging. You don't reach a level and then think, okay, now I'm ready to go out there and play. Live playing is a totally different thing to playing in a bedroom. That's where you really learn to play. I knew that I wanted to play gigs when I started, but I didn't realise how important it actually is. So that's 10 things that I wish I'd learned when I started playing. Now check out this video if you want to know how to fix your tone and conquer those mids, like I mentioned in tip number 3. You get a complete guide to bass tone, and you might be shocked when I break up the tone with a notch filter.